Good afternoon. The advocacy for mushroom vape. You ready? Don't worry, the TV thinks that it's an hour ago, or an hour from now. I don't know why. It's a smart TV. Okay, so what we wanted to do was we wanted to read sitting in a lounge. Here, a lounge setting. Here, I can't even turn my backlight on. Okay. Let me bring this in. All right, so my idea was to give us a semblance of having sat and read a book while vaping. And we have a treat before us, ladies and gentlemen. A picturesque use of prose, right? Here, she's a bit vexed in this paragraph. Haven't we all been vexed? "3rd November 1633, this year my father was appointed sheriff, the last, I think, who served in that honorable office for Surrey and Sussex before they were disjoined. He had 116 servants in liveries, everyone liveried in green satin doublets. Divers, gentlemen and persons of quality waited upon him in the same garb and habit, at which at the same time, when 30 or 40 was the usual retinue of the high sheriff, was esteemed a great matter. Having this many esteemed him was a social greatness. How much greatness is that? How can you tell me in a beautiful manner of today's prose or eloquence, can you tell me how your father is or was? And I am certain that in a lot of ways in 1630s, we were told who our parents were. Yes, in the same sense, we are told who our parents are. But can we deliver such eloquence So he went on to say, this was a great esteem, a great matter, nor was this the best vanity that he exceeded this great numbers. Who was the greatest decliners of it, of the vanity? He was the greatest decliners of the vanity of being supported by so many. But because he could not refuse the civility of his friends and relations, who voluntarily came themselves. What is the important take here in a social norm of today? Could we, as leaders of program, bring our 116 servants dressed alike, of whom are at the same station, persons of quality, diverse gentlemen and persons of quality, same garb and habit. He was a man by honest stature, of whom other men of honest stature became civility to them in the progression of their position in his posse. Do we not take from this the evident claim of our politicians? Our politicians should enjoy their position as a support of their local society during their tenure. There is no reason why they shouldn't have the excess spoils of being in that position. For do we not vote into those offices those who are not worthy of such admiration, of such decadence? He goes on to say, 15 December 1634, my dear sister Darcy departed this life, being arrived to her 20th year of age, in virtue advanced beyond her years, or the merit of her husband, the worst of men. Look at that. I skipped a section, huh? A very important section. Sorry, guys. His father was afterward most unjustly and spitefully molested by the jeering judge, Richardson, for repriving the execution of a woman to gratify my Lord of Lindsay, then admiral, but out of his he emerged with such much honor as trouble. How interesting is that? His father being part of the network, or part of the cycle of monumental men. He was used, kicked to the side, for the gratification of the Lord of Lindsay, who then was admiral. But out of this, he emerged with much honor, as was trouble. And this year, this king made progress into Scotland, and Duke James was born. So that last sentence made everything of nothing. Yes, he was terse in his commentary. He was upset that his father had to be used as a pawn. His father was greatly disgraced, although he emerged with much honor, as what is trouble of such events that transpire before you that you cannot stop. So on one hand, his father was a greater person because of it. At the same time, he lost a lot of ground, I imagine, as to most people who looked to the sheriff as the protector, as their their guy in court, I imagine. Okay, then we'll go on to his sister dying. Now, can you imagine being able to write with a flourish? Not just the facts. With the facts, you have to believe that not only you are going to read this, or as a matter of interest, you may not ever read this again. You don't have a chance to read it and say, maybe I should have wrote it this way. Because now, as soon as you write it, it's out of your memory. Years later, you're not going to be confronted by it saying, you wrote this. Will you remember? Well, at this time, if you wrote a million things a day, you may not remember. So how important is the letter? December 1634, my dear sister Darcy departed this life, being arrived to her 20th year of age, in virtue advanced beyond her years, or the merit of her husband, the worst of men. She had been brought to bed the 2nd of June before, but the infant died soon after her, the 24th of December. $14 days. No, not even that. 9 days. So I was therefore sent home for the 2nd time to celebrate the obsequies of my sister, who was interred in a very honorable manner in a dormitory joining to the parish church, where now her monument stands. By no means. So with the success of the parents, the children must invest in the social order, invest dearly. She stuck her head in. She stuck her head in there. Look. The other side doesn't have the drape. And she couldn't get it out. So she ended up moving the whole thing. Oh, it's too late, too short. But the eloquence is a beauty in its own. The beauty of its own. But then again, how important is a diary? So what are these important? These are important events to be put down. 1635. But my dear mother, now being dangerously sick, I was, on the 3rd of September following, sent for to Watson, whom I found so far spent that all human assistance failing, she in the most heavenly manner departed this life upon the 29th of the same month, about 8 in the evening of Michaelmas Day. So, you went to Mass, connotations. It was a malignant fever which took her away about the 37th of her age and 22nd of her marriage. To our irreparable loss, regret at all they knew her. Certain it is that the visible cause of her indisposition proceeded from grief upon the loss of her daughter, and the infant that her indisposition proceeded from grief, and the infant that followed it. Oh, my mistake. Oh yeah, he's talking about his mother and his sister and her child. And it was as certain that when she perceived the peril whereto its excesses engaged her, she strove to compose herself and ally it, but it was too late, and she was forced to succumb. Therefore, summoning all her children, then living, I shall never forget it, she expressed herself in a manner so heavenly, with instructions so pious and Christian, as made us strangely sensible of the extraordinary loss then imminent, after which, embracing every one of us, she gave us each a ring with her blessing and dismissed us. Then, taking my father by the hand, she recommended us to his care, and because she was extremely zealous for the education of my younger brother, she requested my father that he may be sent to me with Luz, and so having importuned him that he would design to bestow upon her funeral, he would rather dispose among the poor. She labored to compose herself for the blessed change which now she had expected. There was not a servant in the house whom she did not expressly send for, advise, and find infinitely effect with her counsel. Thus she continued to employ her intervals, either instructing her relations or preparing of herself. Western civilization for you. So she, on her deathbed, spoke to 114 people and gave them each advice. She was preparing for her day to come. Her husband sighed and said, look, we could take all this time and energy that you want to extol on this and just give it to charity and be done with it. No, she said, I will do this. Though her physicians, Dr. Meverell, Dr. Clement, and Dr. Land, had given all over hopes of her recovery, and Sir Saunders Duncombe had tried his celebrated and famous powder. Yet she was many days impairing, and endured the sharpest conflicts of her sickness with admirable patience and most Christian resignation, retaining both her intellectuals and her ardent affections for her dissolution, to the very article of her departure. Well, if that isn't the advocacy for mushroom vape, I don't know what is. What is that, grief? Her grief was so bad that she was feeling listless, melancholy, depressed. We learned through these readings that mushrooms have the ability to lift one's spirits. And as we notice, as the grace of God. For she did try Dr. Stander's celebrated famous powder. She would try mushroom vape. And her sense of total loss wouldn't be so great. That is the benefit of mushroom vape. When near her dissolution, she laid her hand on every one of her children, and taking solemn leave of my father with elevated heart and eyes, she quietly expired and resigned her soul to God. Thus ended that prudent and pious woman, in the flower of her age, through the inconsolable affliction of her husband, irreparable loss of her children, and universal regret of all that knew her. She was interred as near as might be to the daughter Darcy, the 3rd of October, at night, with no mean ceremony. He talked of a greatness, a piety. Her grief was so harsh that she gave up. But without being, she was fourth-walled herself. She lived in that little narrative, but she didn't decry her love for her children. But who's to say? This is the 3rd of the ensuing November, after my brother George was gone back to Oxford, before I returned to Lewes, and when I made my way, according to instructions received of my father, for my brother Richard, who was sent the 12th after, so he went back to get his brother Richard. Okay, the kids went off. This year being extremely dry, the pestilence much increased in London and divers parts of England. So divers is diverse, I imagine. February 13th, 1637, I was especially admitted, and as I remember, my other brother, into the Middle Temple, London. Though absent and as yet at school, there were now large contributions to the distressed Palatinates. So, they had issues with schooling as well, dear readers. So this is not as far-fetched as possible to have something to read on a nice mushroom relaxed Friday afternoon. So what's the issue? Nothing happened that shouldn't have happened, and the school got their regular donations without a heartbeat miss. Even though the pestilence much increased in diverse parts of England, that means a lot of contributors have not made it to contribute. The contributors that were still there were now large donations given. So school was bought to kept around. The 10th of December, my father sent a servant to bring us necessities, and the play beginning now to cease on the 3rd of April, 1637. Now remember, of those people that served him were of the same station in life as he was. So you can't read into this as being a cop-out. The father couldn't make it. The father sent the person in his stead who best equated to the moment. These are volunteers who decided to step out of their lives, their own celebrity lives, to work for this guy. But this is a diary of John Evelyn, not his father. He said he left school where till about the last year I have been extremely remiss in my studies. So he left school the 3rd of April, and so by that time he wasn't studying too ardently. He went to university rather out of shame of abiding longer at school than for any fitness, as by that experience he found, which put me to relearn all I had neglected, or but for punctually gained. Same issues we had. Look, you know, the wealthy bought the schools back. They purchased the schools, essentially. Well, they do every year, but now few of her have done it, and because he was part of the contributions, he was able to excel in school. And then he realized that he knew nothing. And out of embarrassment, he went back to school, acknowledging the fact that although school was saved, he was not the best candidate for the school being in saved. In 1637, he was admitted a fellow commoner at Balliol College, Oxford. He subscribed the articles and took oaths at the vestry of St. Mary's. Dr. Bailey, head of St. John's, being vice chancellor, afterward bishop. This is a day and age where this particular element of Western civilization worked strong. You aspire to be closer to God. It appears by letter of my father's that he was upon treaty with Mr. Bathurst, afterward doctor and president of Trinity College, who had been my tutor, but less my brother's tutor, Dr. Hobbs, more zealous in his life than his industrious to his pupils, should receive it as an affront, and especially for that fellow commoners in Balliol, who are no merely more exempt from exercise than the meanest scholars there. My father sent me tither to one Mr. George Bradshaw, no man of Islam, yet the son of an excellent father, beneficed in Surrey. So he was kind of he was on track to the right tutors. He was afraid to get the one. He had gotten the other, which was his brother's. And so, because there was conflict of interest in that, he ended up with George Bradshaw. Wow, think about this. I never thought my tutor had parts enough, but as his ambition made him much suspected of the college, so his grudge to Dr. Lawrence, the governor of it, whom he afterwards supplanted, took up so much of his time that he seldom or never had the opportunity to discharge his duty to his scholars. This I perceiving associated myself with one Mr. James Thickness, when a young man of a foundation, afterward a fellow of the house. So, during his tutor's time, his tutor was going to become a head of a house, head of a foundation, I imagine. But he was disjointed by the previous head, and felt that took up more of his time than trying to get his students to be scholars. And then he was hanging out with Mr. James Thickness, a man of means. His parents bought him into it, so he had to escort him. So those two things kept the tutor away from making our John Evelyn a smart guy. Let's see what he did. By those learned in friendly conversation, they received great advantage. At my first arrival, Dr. Parkhurst was a master, and after his decease, Dr. Lawrence, a chaplain of His Majesty's, and Margaret Professor, succeeded. An acute and learned person, nor do I much reproach his severity, considering that extraordinary remissness of discipline had, till his coming, much detracted from the reputation of that college. He's in his formidable years, with movers and shakers of the hawkers of intelligence. And he said that he did very well by this change of the guard, so to speak. He said he did very well. Then came in my time to the college one Nathaniel Panopios out of Greece, from Cyril, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who, returning many years after, was made, as I understand, Bishop of Smyrna. He was the first I ever saw drink coffee, which custom came not into England till 30 years later. How interesting is this? Not only was he in a preparatory school with the great thinkers of the day, this is the equivalent of a Grecian model of transferring of knowledge, comes someone from the lineage of Constantinople, out of Greece, peppered his ear. So not only were they bringing that type of education system through, now they had a justification of doing so, and they celebrated it mightily. So his college days were dotted with a great big dot. How much fun is that? After I was somewhat settled there in my formalities, for then was the university exceedingly regular, under the exact discipline of William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, then Chancellor. Under the exact discipline of William Laud, I added as benefactor to the library of the college those books, Ex Dono Johannes Evelyn Pujas Cole, Social Commensalis, Fili Richard di Evelini, Econ Ceresi or me. Oh, wow. I wonder if I read that well. Probably not. Bernardo and Thompson and Quintetum. Navarini ex la Sacra. Cressoli Anthology of Sacra. Authors, it seems, much desired by the students of the divinity there. So not only was he at the school of all schools, he was at it the period of time of all periods of time. Such an incredible state of affairs. This should be made into a movie. Upon the 2nd of July being first Sunday of the month, I first received the Blessed Sacrament of the Lord's Supper in the college chapel. Oh, let me see what time it is. It might be late. Oh, it's late. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful day. Such is the advocacy of vape, mushroom vape. Here she comes. All right, thank you guys.